All right, might just get started here. Okay, so welcome everyone. It's lovely to have you here and appreciate you giving me an hour of your time to hear about our construction leadership report. So I'll just go through quickly the session about what we're going to do here. So we'll go through first about who EPIC is, the research, how this actually came about. This was not something I originally set out to do. It was just something that evolved over time, and we'll get into that a little bit more, how that actually happened. As a result of the research that we did, we actually had some key findings, and we found that this was not an Australian issue. This is actually a global issue that is happening across the construction industry. So we felt compelled that we had a duty to be able to share this information to the industry as well. And then we've just got some takeaways at the end with the playbook, just what leaders can do, and we'll have some time for Q&As at the end as well. So firstly, I actually want to acknowledge the people who were part of this report, and I recognise that a few of them are actually online, so I want to give my gratitude to them to start with. How this actually came about was last year I call it a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal, and to interview 50 people around the world. And the criteria was that these people had to have been in the industry for a minimum of 20 years, because what we wanted to do is to help give back to the industry by tapping into wisdom of the collective and just understand, what they have done through their time in the industry, what they've learned, how they've dealt with some issues so that we can actually help the next generation coming into the industry. So I had this BHAG at the start of last year. I'm going to interview 50 people. Didn't know how I was going to do it, to be honest. And I was actually able to achieve that in 6 months. And we interviewed people predominantly from Australia, but there was also quite a few people who came from overseas as well. So we had people from Canada, we had people from the USA, the UK, and the Middle East as well, because we wanted to make sure we had a really diverse group of voices coming to the table as well. So these people came from every single background in the industry you can think of. There were executives right through to tradespeople, people who had worked FIFO, people who are running their own businesses, and everything in between. And as I said, they all had a minimum of 20 years experience. That was like our criteria for being able to do the interviews that we conducted. So this is just to acknowledge all of the people who've been a part of this. I really am very grateful, because you've actually helped bring this to life, which was not something I set out to do at the very beginning, to do a leadership report. But as I said, we felt compelled because of the findings that we had from these incredible people that we got to speak to, that there were some themes that we needed to share with the industry to be able to help the industry as well. So my heartfelt thanks to those 50 people as well. It was an incredible experience. It was actually one of the best experiences in my life, just being able to have those really raw, honest conversations. Nothing was scripted. It was all quite authentic and natural, and just giving people a safe space to be able to share their stories. So let's go on and a little bit about EPIC and what we do. So EPIC was founded in 2023. That was a result of quite a few things that happened. So there's a lot of focus to get more women into the industry. There was a lot of changes that happened in regards to the Workplace Health and Safety Act here in Australia at the time to identify the psychosocial hazards. And I established the company EPIC back then in 2023. And I've been in the industry myself for 30 years. I've worked across many sectors of the industry, from the corporate office right through to FIFO. And I felt this was my calling, to be a good steward, to then be able to set up a company that could help serve the next generation and be able to pass on knowledge for the next generation to help make this industry better. The industry really is at a bit of a crisis point at the moment. So our main focus is just one big goal, which is to help transform the culture in the industry, which encompasses a lot of things, of course. But how we actually do that, we do that through leadership training. That's to help strengthen the leadership capability in the industry. We have developed modules on unconscious bias, targeting key psychosocial hazards. We're starting off with 5 of those at the moment. We also work with teams to build that workforce capability, particularly for new people who are coming into the industry, who have never worked in the industry and have no concept as to the intensity and the pressures that are faced in this industry as well. So it's to be able to help them with the human side of what's needed to cope of being in this industry and just all those daily pressures that they have to handle as well. And then we also provide advisory services to companies, particularly those that are striving to meet targets relating to gender equity, social enterprise solutions as well, which are more so on the government-funded projects. So one of the things that we really recognise is that leadership is what helps shape the culture, and then the culture is what helps shape the outcome as well. So without good leadership, the culture's not going to be great. And then if the culture's not great, that's what's going to impact the outcomes of what's happening. And that's what we're seeing right now in this industry. It's kind of like a bit of a boiling pot at the moment with the different things that are happening. So to touch on as well, an overview of the result of the 50 people that we interviewed. The collective wisdom of this was 1,354 years of industry experience, which is incredible. We had people who, had been in this industry. There was quite a few of them actually who had been in this industry for more than 40 years, which is wisdom that you just cannot get from a textbook. So the collective wisdom of this is incredible. We did make sure we had that gender diversity as well. So 49% of our interviewees were female. We had 26 males and 24 females. And as I said, all of them had a minimum of 20 years experience. So to be able to get, that much diversity as well was awesome, to have that many women with that amount of experience in the industry, considering women are a minority in the construction industry as well. The main thing that we identified as a result of these conversations was that the risks to this industry, they are no longer technical. They are absolutely human risks. And that's as a result of the human skills that are significantly lacking in this industry as well. So this comes down to emotional intelligence, communication skills, resilience, confidence, a whole bunch of different human skills within this industry, which are severely lacking. The industry at a glance. So Safe Work identified that in 2023, there were 45 worker fatalities in Australia. The industry is currently projecting a shortfall of people in the industry of what's needed for the workforce of 300,000 people by 2027, which realistically is only 7 months away. So I don't know where these people are going to come from. Unfortunately, we have one of the highest rates of suicide out of every industry. In Australia here, we've got double the national average and 75% higher suicide rate, particularly for male workers. And then globally, women in the industry represent 11% of the workforce. If we think about Australia here, so the workforce is approximately 1.3 million people. We're sitting at about 13 to 14% at the moment, but there's obviously a lot of focus, as I know, with our counterparts in Canada and the US and the UK, to increase women participation in the industry. The women in trades are still significantly low and sitting at only 2 to 3% as well. And there's a lot of initiatives happening at the moment to get more women into trades roles as well. But when we think about these human elements, then this actually has a flow-on effect with the experiences that people are having in this industry and what women are experiencing in this industry. And this isn't about women. This report is not about women, but there's a lot to be recognised. There's a lot of money being invested with this. But if we're having a lot of human issues, then we need to recognise what the impact of that is as well for people coming in. So just continuing on with the experience for the people that we did interview. So as I said, we had CEOs, we had project directors, we had site managers and safety leaders, engineers, QSs, we had academics involved as well, tradespeople, estimators, HR and workforce specialists. So we made sure we had the whole remit across the board, and then their experience covered off on different parts within the industry as well. So people who've been working on infrastructure and major projects, people in commercial construction, the energy sector, in residential building, in property development, in civil, again from the academic perspective, and then FIFO as well. So that sort of gave the breadth and depth of everything that we had from the people that we had the opportunity to speak with. Now, as a result of that, we had a number of themes come out through the conversations. And as a result of the conversations, as I said at the beginning, nothing was scripted. The conversations were literally just me having a conversation with someone. There was no set questions or anything like that. And everything that came out was unprompted during that interview. So the themes that came out unprompted during these 50 interviews, 94% of them identified there is a huge leadership capability gap, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. 91% recognised mental health and burnout as a major issue in this industry. 88% said about the psychological safety, which that obviously goes kind of hand in hand with the mental health and burnout as well. 86% recognised there was gender inequity. Interestingly, 84%, we call it safety is theatre, and we'll touch on that a little bit more because we're actually going to delve into all of these different themes throughout this presentation. There's the generational retention, which we know we've got an ageing workforce happening in this industry. I was actually reading an article this morning, which it was saying people with, more than 40 years experience, 30 and 40 years experience, are now having to go get qualifications to actually do their job. And they've kind of just getting to the point where it's like, why would I do that? I'm kind of close to retirement age anyway, and they're walking out. So there's years of wisdom just walking out as well because of changes that are happening with, what certification requirements might be required as well. But we have got, the industry obviously is very intergenerational. We've got a lot of youth coming in, like teenagers and things. And then we've got people who are in their 60s and 70s working in this industry as well. So there's huge, the Gen Zs, the Gen Ys, the baby boomers, everyone's kind of working in the industry. As I said, it touches on that retention. The workforce pipeline, the industry has never really been promoted. Particularly, I can speak as a woman, as a career choice for a woman. I never woke up and planned to work in this industry myself. It was kind of something I fell into. And I know for a lot of people, it's, that it is a role that they kind of fall into as well. But that pipeline has never actually been built. I remember when I was at school, it was kind of like you got to year 10, and this will identify, what era I'm from as well. But you kind of got to year 10, and if you didn't want to go on to 11 and 12, then you either, the boys would go off and get a trade, the girls would go off and do hairdressing, for example, and then, only those really stuck around and then might pursue university. So, but it's never been really promoted a lot as an industry to get into. It hasn't been maintained for quite some time. And that's, that's kind of, we're seeing the consequences of that right now. Migrants are underutilised. That's a big thing as well with what's happening there. The psychosocial compliance as well. And then drugs, alcohol, and culture is a massive thing as well. And I would also touch on gambling. Gambling is a big thing in the industry as well. So just to go through what our methodology and research approach was. So as I said, the intent was never to do this as a research piece and to produce a report from the beginning. It's just kind of something that evolved in it, and we did feel it was a duty and an obligation to be able to share this with the industry. So there were 50 senior leaders. The interviews, as I said, there wasn't really a structure. It was having a conversation, and the themes just emerged organically from those conversations. We covered, like a wide scope, predominantly Australia, but we did make sure we had some international voices involved in the conversation as well. And then we actually have cross-referenced everything with data from Safe Work Australia, different industry publications, and different research that's been undertaken over the last couple of years as well to help support what we have found. So let's get into the first one, which is the people and culture gap. And this was where 94% raised the leadership capability gap. And this is why it's been identified that technical excellence is no longer enough, because it is the human side that is having the impact on our people. And we're seeing this a lot. I'm seeing it a lot, particularly on LinkedIn, and a lot of conversations that are happening at the moment about the impact of what's happening with people and the different things of how it's affecting people at the moment. So what came out as a result of these conversations? There are technical experts being promoted into leadership roles without the training of how to actually lead people. And I liken this to the military as an example. The military has a lot of processes you've got to go through for training to be able to get promoted into a leadership position. So you can actually go do your leadership training, and there is no guarantee that you will be put into a leadership position even after you've done the leadership training. Unfortunately, in construction, we do not do that. We do not invest in the leadership training. It's kind of like, as an example, you're a great engineer, you've got really great technical skills, we're going to make you a project manager, but then they may not have the people skills as to how to actually interact and manage a team of people on a project. And that's nothing against engineers, of course, I'm just using that as an example. But this is something that has been identified as a major issue as well. Really, under the workplace health and safety law, leaders are now kind of those frontline people who are the psychosocial safety controllers. And if supervisors are unprepared, it is actually a legal liability for a business. Because when you think about a supervisor or foreman, whatever terminology you'd like to use, they're actually in they're in probably one of the most critical positions ever, because not only are they responsible for a team below them, they're responsible for reporting up, and then they're responsible for working sideways as well to be able to coordinate projects. So they are fundamentally the frontline controllers for psychosocial safety. And if we're not investing in that group of people, we are setting them up to fail. The cultural harm is cumulative, and it is directly linked to attrition, the mental health decline, and the safety failures that we're seeing. We've seen a lot happen over the last 20 years with safety, and how that has evolved. Safety was kind of not so great, in the 60s and the 70s, and there's been a lot more awareness on that, on PPE and harnesses and, job hazard analysis and all that sort of stuff. But the emotional side and the human side has been lacking. And then again, just touching on the workforce shortage by 2027. So one of the comments that we got is that we actually let people manage 50 humans off the back that, hey, you've been here for a while and you're doing a good job. That is not a leadership system. That is just wishful thinking. And as I said, we are setting them up to fail. The next part is this 84% about this safety as paperwork versus safety as relationships. This was actually really interesting because we did speak to quite a few safety professionals as a result of this who came from all around the world. And we're very good at doing the paperwork. We're very good at making sure we've got that kind of stuff in place. But we miss that part of actually the safety of our people as well. You can have the paperwork, but if you're not having the conversations with the people, it's probably not having the impact it should have. So for an example, procedures are being signed, but they're not really being discussed. Risk assessments are being completed, but they're not being internalised. Pre-start meetings just become routine, but they're not actually having the conversations about what people are dealing with. And then near-miss reporting, and especially any of the reporting requirements, are kind of seen as a bit of a nuisance, because I know that impacts safety stats and things for companies who then are tendering on projects further down the track as well. So they do get seen as a bit of a nuisance. So what came out from our conversations of what does work is where mistakes are actually treated as learning opportunities, where speaking up does not carry a career risk. And this is something that ties into the psychological safety as well. People who do speak up, there are people who actually will not speak up even though they're dealing with issues for that fear of retaliation and retribution and that they might lose their job. And particularly for a migrant, it adds another layer, especially if it's linked to a visa, that it could jeopardise their visa as well. What also works is where workers step in, where peers are at risk, that it's kind of that bystander stuff as well, like they're able to step in without fear of anything happening to them as well. And where supervisors are trusted and they're not feared. So one of the comments that came out from one of our HSE directors who'd been in the industry for 33 years, what they saw is that when the relationships were good, the incidents were low. But when the relationships broke down, everything else failed. And it didn't matter how good the documentation looked. If that relationship was not good, everything else failed. So the next part we go to is the testing women to trusting women. And this is the 86% raised gender equity as an unresolved issue. And I know there's a lot of conversation, that's been happening over the last few years with gender equity. So the current stats is that 3 to 4% of women who are in those frontline site roles, between 11, depending on what country you're in, of course, but between 11 and 15% of women who are in the industry. But 30% of women are more likely to leave the industry. The current stats at the moment is, even with the hundreds of millions of dollars that's being invested, and from my research, there's been approximately $320 million invested in the last few years on initiatives to get women into this industry. And they're only staying between 2 to 5 years, which is, to me, paints a big problem and, some unresolved issues there. So when we look at what came out from the conversations, was workplace culture is the primary driver of attrition. It is not recruitment. We cannot bring people in to an environment that is not safe, it's not welcoming, and it's going to cause harm because they're not going to stay. Women experience cumulative microaggressions that signal that they don't belong. I was actually involved, and I know one of our participants as well who's with us and able to join us. We were involved in the microaggressions report for NAWIC, and the terminology is it's death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not one small thing. It's that cumulative thing of just one thing after another, after another, after another. And eventually you get to the point where you're like, that's it, I'm done, I'm out. It is that build up of everything that happens. So the positive duty obligations now require employers to proactively prevent harassment. There has been, a bit of conversation over the last couple of years regarding NDAs following harassment settlements and how they're a legal liability. And there's some shifts happening. Victoria was the start of banning NDAs relating anything. Just as a reminder that an NDA is prohibited for anything that is actually a criminal act as well. So I know people are now probably moving to deed of releases with confidentiality clauses. But for anyone, an NDA is absolutely illegal for anything that is a criminal act. But loneliness, exclusion, and harassment experienced by many women are factors of driving attrition. And I can personally speak from my own experience. I have experienced all of that in my 30 years of working in this industry, particularly when I was FIFO. It was probably one of the most challenging and testing times of my life with what I had to deal with in those environments. So the next theme that we've got is where 68% raised the migrant underutilisation. This was quite an eye-opener for me. We did interview quite a number of migrants and people who various backgrounds as well, but what their experiences were, particularly when they had come to Australia and they were highly qualified people starting in the industry, and what they experienced to get into this industry, honestly, it brought tears to my eyes. It was so heartbreaking to hear their stories. So Engineers Australia reported that nearly half of the overseas-born engineers in Australia are actually not working in engineering roles. And I understand there are some gaps with qualifications that you get overseas to Australian qualifications, but we're not actually looking at what those gaps are and helping to build those gaps or bridge those gaps. And that's something that must be done to utilise the skills of these people who are coming to our country as well. The visa insecurity is a systemic silencer of safety and workplace concerns, especially if someone is here on a work visa or has been sponsored. They will not speak up because their visa is directly linked to their employment. So that puts them in a position that does not make them feel safe to raise concerns. As I said, it fears that they can jeopardise their visa status. You think about people who are working in these FIFO, which is the fly in, fly out settings, for those who aren't aware of that acronym, or the remote site context. It actually amplifies that migrant worker isolation and the mental health risk. Being ex-FIFO myself, I've worked with a number of people from different countries, and it's certainly amplified in those environments, being away because they're here working, they're away from their mother countries, away from their families, and there's just another layer that happens with them that most of us aren't aware of as well. And organisations that can successfully integrate migrant professionals, they recognise that overseas experience during onboarding. Now, one of the quotes that we had was, we had one of our participants who, back home, they were a senior engineer. And when they got here, they were told to start as a labourer because that was the only way they could get their foot in the door in the industry, was by starting as a labourer rather than utilising their engineering skills. One person actually stated how they had to change their name on their resume just so they could actually get a look in. People who had applied for 90 different jobs and was not getting a response. And these are the realities of what our international workforce is dealing with when coming to our country, which in all honesty is not acceptable. Now we go to the mental health emergency, which is a big issue, and we know what the the stats are there are quite alarming. This is not just, whilst I've got the Australian stats here, this is a global issue of what's happening across the board with the mental health emergency, and 91% of our participants raised this as a major challenge. Here in Australia, one worker dies by suicide every 2 days, which is double the national average. As I touched on earlier, 75% of male construction workers have a higher suicide rate. And for the FIFO and the DIDO workers, so the fly-in, fly-out or the drive-in, drive-out workers, have 3 times more greater suicidal ideation, which can be linked to that loneliness and isolation and being away from their support network. So the root causes that were identified as a result of this is that there is unrealistic project timelines and just relentless work schedules. I know myself from working in these environments, you know, they're 12, 14-hour days, they're long days. Myself, I was doing 28 days straight with 1 day off in between. You're a bit of a zombie by the end of it. And thankfully, they don't do those 4-week rosters anymore. They're down to 2 and 3 week rosters, but still you're working continually while you're there because that's what you're there for, to work. Leadership that promotes the well-being but punishes absence. These environments, it's cultures where vulnerability is actually treated as a weakness. Substance abuse in these FIFO and DIDO environments, and the mental health emergency is huge. Like, substance abuse is a coping strategy for a lot of people, but that is actually a result of deeper industry pressures as well, and it's a perpetuating cycle. So if you've got people who are abusing drugs or alcohol or gambling or whatever that addiction may be, you know, what is actually causing that to happen as well, because it is a coping strategy. And the FIFO and DIDO workers described environments where those normal support systems disappear. I can certainly speak to that with, you kind of have site and you have corporate office, and there is a total disconnect with what happens there. The services that are available on a site are completely different and not as much as what you would get if you were working in a corporate office. And you're not forgotten about, but you're not a priority, essentially, because you're not in the corporate office. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's causing this mental health emergency, and we really are at a crisis point, especially when we look at, you know, our suicide rates, the mental health issue. And as I mentioned, this is a global issue. It is happening across the board. So some of the research that came out is that the investment in mental health is a 5.8 return for every dollar that is invested, which results in 23% higher profitability for companies, because then they will have strong wellbeing cultures. The cost at present is approximately $4.7 billion per year in absenteeism, for whatever different reasons that may be of what causes people to get to that point, and then $6.1 billion in presenteeism. So this is where companies and organisations need to realise that mental health, it's not a wellbeing program. It's not just, you know, having people come in and do a chat on mental health or things like that. It's actually directly linked to performance and productivity. And these costs are unrealised costs that companies are incurring that are hitting their bottom line, but are not being represented as maybe a line item on their budget, for example. But it would be absolutely eating away at margins, eating away at profits, eating away at everything, and they're not being recognised, but it is directly linked to performance and productivity. So the next part that we'll touch on is about that silence and retaliation and the courage to speak up. And this is where 88% touched on workplaces where speaking up carries a career risk. And this is happening across the board, from apprentices through to people who've been in the industry a long time. Now, the reasons why people stay quiet, because they've seen what happens to others who speak up, and it's not great. They can be pushed out of the industry. They could be silenced with an NDA or a deed of release. They could be bullied. And even though it's against the law to do that, and especially if it's under the Whistleblower Act, it happens. People make that calculation, is this worth my job? Because a lot of people, you know, they need the job to be able to earn the money to keep a roof over their head, or they're supporting a family, or, you know, the various different reasons of why we go to work and earn an income. And they have to weigh up, is that actually worth it to speak up, to jeopardize this? The industry does unintentionally, and I will say unintentionally, selects people who stay silent, because it's kind of like this thing, let's just bury our head in the sand and not acknowledge it, because that's easier than actually having to deal with the issue, which does not fix anything, let's be honest. It just perpetuates the cycle. And then, as we touched on, NDAs just suppress that pattern of behaviour that companies need to identify. So one of the comments we got was that the perpetrator stayed and the victim left, and nobody was any wiser and nobody was safer as a result of that, because that perpetrator was still there. And that's just heartbreaking to think that's happening. And this is where it ties back to the leadership, because the leadership has a responsibility about this. And this is where it's about holding people accountable, regardless of what your position is, whether you are a tradesperson right through to the CEO. You have a responsibility to make sure that you have an environment that is safe, and where that the issues that are being raised, people are safe to be able to do it so that it's not causing harm. Then we go on to the generational shift. So 78% raise this as a major issue. So across the board, 36% of occupations have a national shortage. In the apprenticeship part, there has been a 41% fall in construction apprenticeships since March 2022, which is pretty sad, to be honest. Now, this generation that's coming through, I actually think they're here to help teach us. They've seen, again, I won't say how old I am, but I do come from an era where if I've been in this industry 30 years, you know, I'm getting up there a little bit, but, you know, this generation is actually helping to teach us about things that, you know, weren't great for us, and they actually want to shift with that. So the things that they're seeking is they actually want that respectful supervision. They want those meaningful learning opportunities. They need to know that there is clear career pathways for them, and that their well-being is taken seriously. So this is where I can see we've kind of come to this point in the industry where it's like they're raising all this stuff where we're kind of like, shit, we need to do something about it, because we've just been operating on a system of how it is, and they're just not going to accept it anymore. So one of our people who we interviewed is actually a vet trainer. They come from a trades background. They've been in the industry 29 years, very well experienced. And what they have seen is that this generation, they are smart, they are hardworking, and they do want a trade. But what happens is they come into the environment and then they are met with a supervisor who just yells at them in front of the crew. There's a workplace where everyone is exhausted, but no one's talking about it. And then they sit there and they go, well, I didn't sign up for this, so why do I want to be in this industry? And that's part of the issue as well of why apprentices aren't completing their apprenticeships. And that's across the board. That's not just for females, that's male and females. So from last count, which I haven't put on here, but I believe it's about 50%, only 50% of apprentices are actually completing their apprenticeships. And I've spoken to a number of them who are third, fourth year, trades apprentices, and they're just at the point where it's like, we just can't do it anymore. We cannot do it. And I'm just kind of like, you just hang in there. These are some options available to you of how you can manage it. You know, they're so close and the light is at the end of the tunnel, but they just can't see any way to be able to cope with this stuff of what's happening in the industry when they're actually starting. So let's talk about people who are getting it right, because every single one of these leaders that I spoke to, what I recognise is that they're all here to actually help give back to the industry now and to help make a difference, and things that they're doing and things that they're seeing to help get it right. So the first one is they do see safety as human performance. They focus on the conditions that actually make mistakes possible, because I actually don't like to call it a mistake. I like to call it a learning opportunity, because in everything, it's always about what can you learn from this? What can you improve? What can you make better? Making sure that people growth is a business strategy, and that is the investment in the people, and that is part of the core business strategy. Not just going, we'll put you into this position, off you go, you know, no dramas, you're on your way. Every single person is being invested in so that they can help develop, because as soon as you can develop others, then that's actually going to help lift the standard as well. Leaders who become the change. So it's helping to build those pathways for the next generation as well. And it's up to leaders to be able to do that, to be able to show people what the next step is and the next step. You know, not everyone wants to be a leader. Not everyone wants to be a manager or a project director or a supervisor or whatever it may be for them. But there are people who do, and they need to know what those pathways are as well. Leadership that has people's backs. This is a big one, where that trust, loyalty, and having a genuine and shared commitment to the team. So it's not about me, it's about the we part. You know, how can we be better? How can we do this? I liken a construction project to a football team, just as an analogy, is that you've got multiple players on that team. So you've got your asset owner, you've got your principal contractor, you've got your subcontractors, then you've got all the different parts in that. But you're all actually on the same team to achieve a common goal, which is to get a project built. And if you're not all working together, having that trust, loyalty, and that shared commitment, you're never going to get the football to the end of the field. So it's all about making sure the leadership is building that and ensuring, you know, they do have people's backs to be able to achieve those goals. That mentorship is seen as infrastructure, because that helps create leadership and better retention as well. And a lot of the people we spoke to, it was about the people who actually invested in them with mentoring them and teaching them and supporting them and helping to pass on that knowledge to help elevate them as well. Sponsorship as a leadership, this was a big one as well, which is being able to support that emerging talent and potential, recognizing that emerging talent and potential, and helping to open the doors for them to be able to get in. And then, of course, creating a culture that works. So it's all about the daily choices. It's not about policies. They're great. They're just supporting things. It's not about slogans or values, posters on the walls, anything like that. It is about the small daily decisions that people are doing every single day is what will make the difference. And that is what will shift the dial with culture. So the anatomy of what makes a culture work. So there's 6 behaviours that were consistently demonstrated, and that was that visible leadership. So being present on site, knowing your people, engaging directly with them, having that psychological safety where people could raise their concerns without fear, and treating those incidents as learning opportunities. Making sure diversity is a strategy, and I'm not just talking about, you know, targeting 51% of the population. I'm talking about everyone from a diversity perspective. The migrants, Aboriginals, people with disabilities, you know, diversity comes in many forms. So being able to help strengthen decision-making and problem-solving skills. Mental health in planning. So it's being able to recognise the human limits including recovery time and support, particularly for our FIFO workforce as well. And then career development, where workers can actually see what those growth opportunities are, and companies are investing in leadership capability as well. And consistent accountability, because nothing happens unless people are held accountable. So making sure that everything applies to everyone equally, from the apprentice to the project director to the executives, the whole way down. So one of the comments we received was culture is what happens when a senior person walks past bad behaviour and does nothing. But it's also about what happens when a leader stops, they turn around and they actually say, not on my watch, that's not happening. Okay, so then this is the takeaways of what people can actually do from here. So we've developed, as part of the report, we've included a playbook to give people some tangible solutions as to what they can do, because it was about identifying what the issues were and then what are some recommendations and solutions to be able to help as well. So there's 5 different focuses in that regards. So the psychosocial safety leadership. And these are just a couple of pointers of what people can do in the next 90 days. Identify 3 top hazards and develop some control. Audit the last 5 incident investigations. Is it systemic, or is it a cultural root cause, or is it individual behaviour? Being able to train those frontline supervisors in psychosocial hazard recognition and doing that early intervention. And then review the incident reporting data. If the near miss is low, then that is identifying that there is a cultural barrier, and that silence is probably prevalent and creating a system failure as well. The next part is about the gender equity and inclusion leadership. Asking women to honestly describe what their experience is. Review the last 3 promotions and exits and see what patterns may have emerged from that. Making sure that any allegation of gender-based harassment, it is actually treated with the same accountability as any other safety incident. And then review the facilities. I mean, we are 2026 and we still have sites where women do not have access to toilets, which is a basic human right. So review the facilities, review the PPE. Do they accommodate everyone? Then the mental health and workforce wellbeing. Review rosters and workload design. Does it give people the genuine chance to recover? And if not, what is one immediate change that could be implemented? Make sure that mental health is treated as part of a standard toolbox talk, and it's a normalised conversation. There is still a lot of stigma about mental health. I will admit, in the 30 years I've been in this industry, it is shifting and there is a lot more awareness, but there is still stigma. So we need to start normalising this, because if we break an arm, we treat that. But if, we've got something going on up here because of stress and pressure, we still actually don't look after it as well as if we do a physical injury. Ask your EAP provider for an uptake. If there's low uptake, it doesn't mean that people are fine. It just means that people don't feel safe to reach out, or they may be needing other avenues to be able to reach out. So one of our general managers who'd been in the industry 23 years, he actually said in a site meeting, I've been struggling, and had that vulnerability and opened up, and then had 3 guys come up to him afterwards and said they were having a hard time too. So sometimes that's what it needs, is someone to be that leader and take the first step and put their hand up and say, hey, I'm struggling. And then you realise that you're actually not on your own. Other people may be as well. And it's through that collective peer support as well that actually helps others as well. The integrity, accountability, and speak up culture. This is something we need an awful lot of and is severely lacking in the industry, unfortunately. Audit the last 3 complaints. What was the outcome for the person who raised those issues? Are companies using NDAs for harassment or bullying? And is that actually current with values and legal obligations? Who's someone who actually did the right thing? It did personally cost them in the last 12 months. And I'm having a number of conversations at the moment in regards to this of people who've spoken up and have been pushed out. Make sure there is a culture of speak up recognition. Treat it as the same status as like if there is a project delivery milestone, that it is actually acknowledged and rewarded as well. Making sure that we are future focused and that we do have this adaptive leadership as well. So look at who are your highest potential emerging leaders. Do they have their development plan in place? Do they have a mentor? Are leaders having conversations with the Gen Z workers about what they need to stay? And if not, have that conversation and do it within the next 30 days. Like, don't wait. Have a look at that succession pipeline. And if the top 5 people in the company left tomorrow, who's ready to take their place? And then also engage with, leaders who treat change, with the digital tools and new delivery models, because we're in a world right now where it is rapidly changing. Like AI is changing everything at a pace that none of us can probably keep up with. But we need people who are in a position who can treat this change well, and not see it as a threat, so then that way we can actually keep building this leadership ability. So this whole thing, this is not a call out about anything. It's actually a call in, because we work in an industry, as challenging as this industry is, I would not have lasted 30 years if there was not something I enjoyed about this industry. I actually love this industry. It's dynamic. It's, you learn so much. You meet the most amazing, incredible people. But we've carried this stuff for far too long, and it is costing lives. And that's something that I am personally not prepared to accept, and will do my part to help make a difference in that space. So the values that, we would love to see in this industry is that it is inclusive, it is courageous, it is human, and it is safe. Because we are not just here to build structures, we're actually here to help build trust. So thank you for listening. You're welcome to scan that QR code now, and you will be able to download the free report. When you scan the code, you just need to enter in your name and email address, and then you will get an automatic email with the report attached. And we've got